Have you been disappointed with your black and white film results? This can happen for a number of reasons, but I'm gonna go over what I feel are the kind of 5 biggest reasons you might be getting just poor results from your black and white film. But I'm not gonna go over the best cameras or films to shoot and some of the other goofy reasons I've heard out there. Now, what will help you is getting a solid understanding of the process and what's actually going on and what's going wrong. This will help you stop wasting money, ending up with more disappointing images. So let's just jump in and figure this all out. Jumping from film to film. Now, I bring this up a lot, and if you're new to this and you seriously want to get better, just stop shooting every type of film just because you can. Pick a film that just suits your style of photography that you're going for and stick with it. What you want to be doing is taking a lot of images with that film. It's like anything else, you really just have to put in the reps. So instead of hopping from film to film, thinking that that's what your problem is, focus your energy on learning how to see light and shadow and how they actually interact with each other. Because without that, it doesn't really matter much what film you're shooting. And unless it's 20-year-old expired and really crappy film, it shouldn't make a significant difference. And that's because most black and white films available can take really excellent pictures and really terrible pictures. Too many new photographers get caught up in what film and fancy developer they're gonna use. This has way less bearing on the final outcome than you would actually think. So pick one good film and just shoot it a lot. Practice the more important aspects like your subject, contrast, composition, lighting, texture, and just really learn how to meter for that film properly. Now, once you've shot just a whole bunch of rolls and feel like you've really mastered it, then go on and experiment and try something else, because chances are you're probably not gonna want to. So underexposing your film unintentionally is another huge mistake that beginners make. And the fact that digital photography is basically the opposite when it comes to exposure really confuses things, because we're taught to protect and expose for the highlights. And it throws people off when they come over to film. The same way you clip and lose highlights in a digital image is kind of the same thing that happens when you underexpose and clip your shadows in a film image. Basically, that information's not recorded, so you can't recover it. So here is what an actual good tone curve looks like. This one was exposed and developed correctly. Here we have the shadow area, the midtones, and the highlights. So we can break this up somewhere in here and in here. Now, anywhere on the curve that is steeper means it has more contrast and more separation. So basically, there's more contrast on this straight line portion of the film than on what's called the shoulder and the toe. And this area here is where all the exposure actually happens. So what you want is to get these shadow areas up into this straight line portion of the film. And that's why giving more exposure usually is what you're after when it comes to shooting film. Basically, this is gonna give you good separation and depth in your shadow areas. Now, if we compare that to an underexposed example, so here is our properly exposed and here is our underexposed, but they were both developed the same. So if you look at this example, you can see that underexposing puts our shadows that we want on the flatter section of the film. Whereas here, they're on the steeper section of the film. Let's circle that there too. So basically, when you underexpose, you're losing shadow contrast, you're losing depth, and all the things that kind of make shadows, and you're turning it into this muddy mess. And oftentimes, if you underexpose enough, there's just nothing on the film to even create any separation. But if you do want to, say, shoot a film in a way it was never really intended to be shot, and by this I mean pushing the film, you want to do it with intention. You want to do this knowing what you're doing going in. Because I like that look too. It can be pretty cool. So you can push your film to 400 and beyond. That would be intentionally underexposing your film. And you want to make sure you understand that and understand what's happening. And I say this because there's a lot of just kind of weird and bad information out there. I did a simple Google search, and AI came back and said that pushing film increases the sensitivity of the film. And this is kind of, in my opinion, not correct and kind of misleading. It's not completely incorrect because different developers will have an effect slightly on film speed. But when you overdevelop, which is basically when you're pushing film, you're shooting it, you're underexposing it, and then overdeveloping to try and compensate for that. And what happens is you end up more with a curve that looks like this. It disproportionately develops the shadow area to the midtones and the highlights. So the midtones and the highlights end up getting a lot steeper, and you get a lot more contrast in here, where you do get a little buildup in the shadows, and you do get a little bit of a speed increase if you do it correctly. So you can see you're shortening up the actual dynamic range of the film, but you're increasing the contrast a lot. And the other thing that happens is you're gonna get a little bit more grain from that overdevelopment. And I happen to really like some of my favorite images by other photographers are shot this way. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it whatsoever. In fact, it's a super creative tool that can kind of lead you down this whole other path. But it should definitely be something intentional, and you should understand the trade-offs involved when you are doing this. Another thing that seems to be a problem for many photographers starting out with black and white film is getting blurry images. And I think it's because we've just gotten so accustomed to shooting with image stabilized devices like newer digital cameras, and on our phones we really don't have to think too much about what shutter speed we're at because their optics and the image stabilization is just so incredible in these that we've gotten a little spoiled. So most older film cameras don't have image stabilized lenses, and they certainly don't have image stabilization in the body. So shooting handheld at 1/8 of a second is almost guaranteed to get you a blurry image. So a rule of thumb would be to use your focal length as your guide. So if you're shooting with a 50mm lens, don't go below, say, 1/60th of a second or 1/50th of a second. And if you're shooting with a 35mm lens, keep it above 1/30th of a second. Now, I usually like to double or triple that, and it really depends on the depth of field I'm going for, the lighting and other things, but to be safe, if I can, I like to do that. And the other factor that can have a huge bearing on this would be just how steady you are as a person and hand holding your camera when shooting pictures. On this note, I would also recommend investing in a good tripod. That way, when you do want to use slower shutter speeds for creative effect or just want to get more depth of field, you can get that done and you don't have to worry about it at that point. All right, do me a quick favor and smash that subscribe button if you haven't already to make sure you don't miss future videos. Another mistake I see people make, and I am guilty of this as well, is just thinking because it's shot on film, it's automatically a great image. This is pretty far from the truth. What makes a good photo usually has very, very little to do with what camera it was shot with or what film it was shot on. Think about how you plan on actually shooting the images and come up with a bit of a plan before you actually go out to take the pictures. Pre-visualize how the shadows are gonna look, what the midtones are gonna look like, and where the highlights are gonna fall. Are you gonna shoot these tight and minimalistic, or are you gonna go a little wider and more environmental with them? Is the contrast gonna be high? Maybe it will be low. Running through all these things before you actually take the picture is going to help you create something that's much more impactful to the viewer. So don't fall into the trap of thinking just because it was shot on film, it's going to be good. At the end of the day, images shot on film are pretty much the same as shot on your phone in terms of how good the image is. You can take amazing images on either, and you can take terrible images on either. So let me know down in the comments below what has been your biggest struggle with learning and trying to shoot black and white film. And if you enjoyed this video, I think you're gonna love the next one right here.